Hey everyone, welcome to Creative Architects by Castos. I am your host, Angela Hollowell, and this is a podcast about the future of the creator economy. In this episode, I am joined by Corey Gumbs, who is the founder of the Black Podcasters Association.
Trends are trends, right? They come and go. So if you're built on trends, you're constantly going to have to keep one up and you're constantly going to try to figure out how to stay ahead instead of finding your lane and figuring out who you are, your voice.
This podcast is brought to you by Castos. One of the best ways to learn something is to go directly to the top people in that field. At Castos, we do just that. Each episode of Creative Architects features creators who have taken their work to the next level. We hope that by watching and listening, it will inspire more creativity in your work. Along the way, Castos wants to be a part of your creative journey. From our suite of tools, feature-rich hosting platform, and even our production services, we're here to help. Connect directly with us by emailing hello@castos.com or by clicking on the link in the description. Thanks for tuning in. It means a lot. I hope you enjoy the show. So I really want to start with how and why you decided to start a group for Black podcasters exclusively.
Um, Long story short, back in 2020, 2019, 2020, when I was trying to learn more about the podcasting space, I was in a bunch of Facebook groups. And it was, for me, it was mainly like interactions between people, some Black people I saw in the groups and other groups of people. And I think personally, it was like, I think some things were getting lost in translation, the cultural differences, as well as just a certain attitude that certain voices had in regards to like buying equipment and how to make content. I was like, well, in our community, it's a little bit different on how we go about things, and it started to get a little pretentious, a little condescending. And I was talking to a friend, and I was like, just telling them my observations, and she challenged me. She was like, "Well, why don't you start your own group then?" She's like, "If you don't like it, start your own group." So I never backed down from a challenge. So I was like, "Okay, let's figure it out." So she helped me set it up, and then I was just trying to figure out like what I wanted it to be. Um, I didn't want it to be something where it's like, where it's a thing for Black people and we're just isolating ourselves. I wanted it really to be something that was going to be something that for a space for Black people to come to, but also to help move the industry along and be a part of the podcast industry versus being separate from it.
Yeah. And so since you started the community, how do you feel like you have personally benefited and, grown as a podcaster?
Oh man, it's been a wonderful experience. I've met so many different people, so many supportive people. I've gotten to hear different perspectives, different learn that there's no one way to do everything. I'm a pretty regimented person, so that was like a big learning thing for me. Even just running the group, it was like, I wanted to do it this way, and I had to learn to adapt and pivot during the course of that. And just meeting the various different people in the community, outside the community that will offer advice and perspectives and things that I never thought about. It just helped me personally grow as a person, not even just as a podcast, as a person. I started to look at content creation a little bit differently, understanding how people's voices work, but as well as my own. So it's just so much. I met a lot of wonderful people who've turned into friends, um, and it's just been a great experience. I think it's also helped me understand the power of podcasting as far as as the industry has been growing, especially through the pandemic, being more becoming more corporatized or monetization, focus on monetization. It helped me understand that the independent voices and independent creators are still very much important to the stability and the growth of the industry.
hmm Oh man, that brings up so many good questions. And I think that was just like such a feel good answer. Like sometimes when we create for other people, we underestimate how much that's going to positively impact us as well.
Yeah, that's true. When I look back, like I was actually thinking about it last night. We had a workshop, and I was, unwind. I went to the movies, and on my way home, I'm driving, listening to some music, and I was like, I just like this whole idea has impacted not only just the members, but the people around them and the influence that they have on other people. So it's like, that's amazing.
Yeah, that's beautiful, and that's the best part of community. Um, so when you were in the Facebook group, you kind of noticed that some things were getting lost in translation. And one thing that I feel like gets lost is why, groups like this exist, why sometimes it may feel like, you know, Black creators are kind of sectioning themselves off to have support groups. What are some of the challenges that you see for Black podcasters in the creator economy?
So my background comes from music. When I was younger, I was trying to get into the music industry, and I'm a big history buff. So I think part of also the motivation for me starting was understanding my history as a Black person in America in regards to us in the entertainment media spaces. And I've always, grew up in the hip hop 80s, 90s. I remember when hip hop only played on the radio in New York City 2 hours a week, right? And those or depending if you caught the underground stations, but those were big for me growing up because I would have to sneak to stay up late and stuff. And now look at the effects of hip hop, right? When it was considered a fad, it wasn't going to go anywhere. And that's how it's always been for our community inside of the entertainment spaces. Okay, the business is what it is, but we as Black people, we're there at the beginning, we're there in the middle, we're there as it starts and grows. And I just saw the podcasting space as like an opportunity in my lifetime for what the music was industry was back in the 40s and 50s for a lot of Black artists where they got their big breaks and stuff like, and I was like, this is an opportunity for us. So what does it mean? So that was part of my motivation too for creating a group because unfortunately we didn't have advocacy bodies for us in the music industry, in the TV industry, in the movie industry. And I was like, that's one of the things I wanted to do is make sure we had a voice. We had to try to create an organization that we could sit at the table, not have to pick up the scraps and make our own table, but I don't want to say integrate, but let people know we're here, right? Like we're not this time around, we're not playing. And truth be told, my philosophy, and I could be completely wrong, but my philosophy is going to be we people the industries always look towards our community when the money starts to dry up from the ideas that they had because we've had to work so under the radar so long and to survive in these industries that we get really really creative, we get really innovative on how to survive in it. And that's what hip hop was, that's what the hip hop industry was. We're selling records and stuff out of the trunks of our cars, doing our own shows. And, which is when you hear these stories, hip hop is 50 years old this year. So you're starting to hear all these stories that happened behind the scenes to get it to where it's at. So for me, and the truth is, if you follow me on Twitter, I can be very vocal about certain things. Diversity is still a big issue, not only for Black content creators, but marginalized people and people of color. And I think it's going to be important for us to advocate for ourselves and speak very loudly about the unfairness on how Black content creators are treated with monetization and other ways in the industry. And this is an industry where I don't, we can spin up our own server and website and launch our podcast from there. So it's almost like pirate radio back in the days. So
And that's what I've always thought about podcasting. It's like another form of radio and entertainment. And, especially now we're doing a video podcast. It's like
yeah.
this is a natural next step. Some radio hosts go to talk show hosts, and this is kind of like the evolution of that. And that didn't kill radio, just as this isn't going to kill podcasting. And again, when we talk about innovation and, really Black creators being at the forefront of a lot of the trends that we see reach mainstream success, we don't always see that, attribution going back to the creators, right? Which is
Right.
something that it really does need to happen. So, in your mind, like, what are some ways that the podcast industry can be more inclusive for Black podcasters?
Understand that we're not the typical model. Our audiences don't consume things typically like other audiences, right? So for instance, I've had some conversations about the advertising space, right? I think the work that like Edison Research does with their report, the Black Listeners Podcast Listeners report, what Pew Research just put out recently about the influence we have, the how loyal and how engaging our audiences can be. I think people get too enamored with the numbers. So when you're approaching a black content creator, I think you need to work with them and try to understand what is the influence they actually have on their audience, because you know that's how we do things. Like, if I like something, I'm gonna tell my friends and they'll go check it out, right? It's a lot. We do a lot of word of mouth. We trust. We trust, but we don't give trust willingly, right? We'll trust you to up to a certain point. And those hosts that have like really good followings, that have really good relationships with their advertisers, sponsors, whatever, those they're gonna sell products for you. They're gonna sell things. That's how Carl Kanai and all these fashion brands back in the '90s got big, right? It was through word of mouth. It was through the trust of those, like, the rappers with their fan base. So I think for a lot of corporations or people looking to support black content creators, especially in the sponsorship monetization side, you might have to break the mold. You might have to look at things a little bit differently, and you need to sit down and talk to these content creators to understand better what their shows are about, how they engage their audiences, and what kind of feedback they get back from them. Because I've seen people do it. Like, I've seen rappers. I'm always going to refer to the music industry. That's what I've seen rappers, what might be like, at a show with only 100 fans, but those people brought the shirts, they brought the music, they supported, they donated money. So don't just because don't rely too much on the numbers when you're looking at black content creators. Look at the influence, the sphere of influence they have.
Yeah, it's definitely a situation of quality over quantity, you know what I'm saying?
Right.
Because it's like you said, like, even if you have 1,000 podcast listeners or whatever, 10,000 podcast listeners, if only a tenth of them are actually buying the stuff, whatever you're selling versus 100, someone with 100 podcast listeners, but they got 50 to 70% of people buying the stuff, like what is your real return on investment there in terms of really
Right.
creating a genuine relationship with that audience and that podcaster? Um, which again is something that I think podcast analytics are growing. I don't think we've reached the point where we can say what you're saying, right? Like, well, we can look at the numbers and quantify, direct influence as easily as we can with like YouTube, which has a crap ton of, analytics, right, in comparison to podcasting. So, um, again, I don't know. I don't know how we translate that in the long term, other than just straight up having a conversation. Like, what are we in the 90s? We have to talk to people now, but that's the way it should be, though, right?
It's
Like,
relationship building,
yeah,
and we're good at a lot of our content creators are good at that, right? I think also part of it too is like that. Like, one reason people might ask, well, why does your organization exist? Why do groups like yours exist? Because we create a safe space for people, for our members to come in and complain, talk about, give their opinions. And I think, and maybe that's something on our side we need to, not just myself, but other groups of people, for people of color and stuff. Maybe we need to be more vocal, or create an opportunity for people to come into our community to hear out, like maybe some kind of townhouse conversation, so that they could hear how our members talk about sometimes the unfairness of and the struggles. Like, I see people out here grinding, and I'm like, but this person over here is getting easy. And I've talked to some people behind the scenes, like, hey, if you really want to, you can't just come into our community. And I think that's another important thing. You can't just come into like the black community, and I might speak for some of the Latino communities, but you can't just come in here bearing gifts and think that we're not looking at you side eye. The history here in America, I speak at least in America, has always been riff with with us looking at things side eye, because if you read a book, or you see how things gone politically, people make promises and they don't keep them. So as a company, as a business, you have to come with a genuine interest into this community, and it's a long game. You got to work, you got to put a little effort, you got to put a little time, a little resources into it to help maybe even build some of these people up. The music industry is like, you could sell 100,000 records, we could work with you, right? It's the same thing kind of here. We can build, going back to the days, like even in music, they suffer from artist development. Some of these companies have to go with some of these black content creators and work with them to help develop them into those I guess those stars, or whatever it is your intentions are. But I think it's an opportunity for people to build brands within a community that technically a lot of these companies struggle to reach, and communicate with. So, but
Yeah.
again, that's my opinion.
No, no, that's a valid opinion because one thing I was thinking about, when, you know, as this is a show about the creator economy, we think about, okay, well, where is this headed? Where are the gaps? And I think media training is a big gap for podcasters, right? I
Oh
think
yeah,
because like you said, podcasting is super accessible. You really don't need to invest a lot of money, especially for an audio only podcast, maybe not even for a video podcast. You can just hop on, Riverside, StreamYard, whatever, get you a nice little mic
right.
and
Yeah,
get it moving,
you
you
can
know
use
what I'm
your
saying?
phone.
Yeah, like the startup is so accessible. People don't think about necessarily quality out of the gate. They're just thinking about getting started. And I can't be mad at that because I'd rather you start imperfect than wait a long time to be perfect. But it's also okay, as you continue to grow and gain an audience and gain traction and maybe invest in gear and things like that. But are you investing in your ability to create a good show and, be,
Right.
a source of influence for your audience. And I know that's a controversial way to look at it, but people are listening to you. If people have grown an affinity to you as a podcast host, the reality is they are more likely to buy from you if you recommend a product that you truly believe in or a service you truly believe in. But people aren't thinking of, they're just okay, well, I got the audience. Why aren't the sponsors or whoever coming, or why aren't the big brand deals coming? Or why isn't, marketing my own, products working so well.
That's also part of on our side too, right? And that's something we do in our community is try to get people to a certain point. You can't just have a large audience and think brands are going to come. I will always credit. I went to a Sounds Profitable event last year um, about brand safety, and I was invited by someone, and I think that was a great experience for me because as I was sitting there looking, listening to their report and their findings, it made I got hit, like a lightning bolt struck me, and I was sitting there and I was like, so many of our black content creators talk themselves out of they're talking themselves out of potential sponsorship, brand deals, and so forth and all that because of the subject matter. But I also, and it's for me, it's like that weird conundrum where like, yeah, but they also need to be authentically themselves. We do have not the most popular cultural norms, and opinions and things that some groups would agree with, and positions that are, and that's a long history that we're still working through as a community as we grow and mature. But I think companies that are willing to invest to help find that balance and help keep black content creators, because one of the things we do have is we do push back when we feel like you're trying to change us. You're trying to you're trying to define our blackness, and one of the biggest misconceptions, both in a lot of areas, is that blackness is not it's not monolithic. We have our jokes, the black card jokes and all that stuff, but being black is not monolithic. We have people in different parts of the country, different life experiences, different education experiences. So it's a very complicated and it has a lot of variables in it. And those companies and those people who are willing to sit down and invest some time and energy to work with black content creators to help guide them to certain points, but also respecting who they are, what they are, and what the culture here is in America.
Mhm.
I think those are going to be the ones that win
Yeah.
at some point. It's,
Yeah.
you
No,
know,
I agree. And I think you're touching on something that I think is a great note to end on, which is one, we're talking about a lot of huge cultural differences between Black podcasters and the potential companies and organizations and brands that they'll be working with, which is something that, again, is going to have to grow and develop as representation at those organizations and companies grows. And as Black people get better at communicating kind of the nuance of
right.
our culture basically. Um so we talked, really, this is a lot of talk about monetization, but I really want to know what are your thoughts, and what are you excited about in the podcasting space in terms of trends that you're seeing in terms of developments that you're seeing in the podcast industry. I just really want to know for people who are either thinking about podcasting or who are podcasters that are watching this now, like what are some things maybe they should, put on their radar as well?
I don't know. I don't pay. That's my flaw as personally is my personality. I don't pay attention to trends like that. I more look at podcasting, from its foundation, and trends are trends, right? They come and go. I think the people who do very well are the ones who figure out their lane. I always had an issue with trends because, like I said, they come and go. So if you're built on trends, you're constantly going to have to keep one up, and you're constantly going to try to figure out how to stay ahead instead of finding your lane and figuring out who you are, your voice, and carving your way in it. Now, that's typically the more frustrating. That's more the long game. Takes a little bit more commitment, a little bit more dedication to do it. But the other part is in that process, you should be willing to pivot as well. Like if something's not working, don't keep trying to force it. Just figure out how can I make this work, or how can I shift a little bit to make it work, or where can I adapt? But sometimes you just gotta walk away. So if I'm just talking to a new podcaster, like remove your ego because I know this is a creative process that you're in, but it's not about you. It's about your audience. Um, and you want to make sure you bring your audience the best value you can. And sometimes that means those ideas or the way you're handling things needs to be thrown away, right? And you need to pivot and reshape yourself. Um, for me, it's about I'm excited. I'm just excited. Period. About where we're at. We were just talking the other day. Like I remember when everybody was excited that Apple Podcast got to the millionth podcast. Right. It seems like such a long time ago, but it was only 2-3 years ago. And seeing where the industry's at now, since back then, is like wow. I'm still excited to see the new shows, the creative ideas people come up with to try to figure out figure out their lane in this with that adaptation of more video podcasts, audio podcasts. So I'm me personally, I'm just excited. I'm a simple man. I'm excited about the growth. I'm excited just to see people. I'm also excited to see it's kind of I don't want to say leveling out, but it's kind of the fat is kind of being cut off. So because you need that, you need when you have this explosion of growth, then it needs to reset itself. So I'm excited to see how the people are in it readapt and adapt themselves to the reset and just the potential of what they can do. I mean, this whole thing is just fun to me. I don't know if I answered your question, but
No, you did. You did. I
but
love
that's
it.
how
I
I
love
see it.
it. Yeah. I mean, like low key, like I know people hate comparisons with YouTube, but this is kind of how it feels. It was like you saw these YouTubers reaching 1 million subscribers and,
Right.
we hit, 1 million plus videos on YouTube very quickly, so much, it exploded with shorts, when the 1 millionth short was posted in very short order. But, it's also like, again, people go to it for quick wins and virality and trends, but then they're like, oh, this is work if I want to like maintain this. And so the, people who
Yeah.
can't sustain that pace, they fall off. Um, Especially if they feel like their work isn't being seen and things like that. So I do think you kind of need that, like you said, that hard reset, like, okay, who's really in it? Who's really dedicated to
Yeah.
making the best show, even when it feels like it's not working? Because those are the people that are going to be around in 3 or 5 years to reap the benefits and reap the rewards of sticking with it and finding their groove and finding their rhythm, which is not sexy, maybe not always glamorous, but it's uh an evergreen way to success. So
I'm also I want can I add? I'm also excited seeing podcasting growing on a global scale because now we get to see how other groups of people in the world utilize this platform for their own success. And there's things they can learn from us. There's things we can learn from them. And I think for me, that's the evolution of podcasting on a global scale and just seeing all these different cultures coming together and using it as a tool, how they culturally deal with things. I think it's going to make the industry better, and it's going to make a lot of podcasters stronger in that process as they see how other groups and people see this platform, so this medium. So I'm excited about that too.
yeah, yeah, I love that. Thank you so much for sharing your insights with me today. For everybody watching, this is Corey Gumbs of the Black Podcasters Association. Please check out his community, check out his newsletter. And yeah, can't wait to see you guys in the next episode.
And thank you for having me. I'm really excited about this show, and I can't wait to check all the other episodes. But thank you for having me here.
Yeah, absolutely. That's all for this episode. If you enjoyed it, please give us a 5-star review on your listening app, like this video if you're tuning in on YouTube, and subscribe for more episodes. In the next episode of Creative Architects by Castos, I'll be talking with Jay Klaus of Creator Science, and you won't want to miss it. I'll catch you in the next episode.